Okay.
My name is Ashley Hatchett. I'm a junior. I'm an international studies major, and I'm also affiliated with the Gay Straight Alliance.
I'm Craig Crowder. I'm in the English department, and I'm a member of the English Grad Student Organization and the president of the UK chapter of the Rhetoric Society of America.
My name is Karen Cochran. I'm a senior in anthropology.
Hi, I'm Millie Bailon. I'm majoring in environmental science, and I'm the director of the EcoRep program. Director of the EcoRep program, what can this? Bailon.
My name is Hannah Jones. I'm a junior geography major, and I'm the education chair of Student Wellness Ambassadors on campus.
My name is Rohit Jairam, and I'm a master's student in the Department of Biomedical Engineering.
And I'm Autumn Murphy. I am a Gaines Fellow. I was involved with mock trial and lit campaign.
And not all of us are familiar with you three, so we'd love for you three to introduce yourselves. I'm sure everyone knows you, Dr. Capilouto, but you three to...
Yeah, you can dismiss me that.
Yeah, we'd love for
about 2 minutes in.
I'm Jason Schloffer. I'm a 1998 graduate through the political science department here, and I work in the athletics department.
Thank you for coming.
I'm Phil Swinford, 1988 graduate of the University of Kentucky in political science. I'm working president.
Great, and so, yeah, thanks for those introductions. Now, Autumn's going to run us through sort of what the agenda looks like, that I know you have a copy of, and you two have a copy shared over there.
Okay, so the first thing is Brock's going to talk about the explanation of our purpose for the meeting and also our end. And then we're going to have Ashley speak about the Rana Plaza Massacre. Then I will speak about the affiliation we made in 2013 with the Workers' Rights Consortium. Then Craig will talk about the Alliance, and Kieran will talk about the Accord. And then Brock will talk about the F Corporation as a company and several human rights abuses that have been documented by them. And then Amelia will talk about the National USAS campaign, because we're not the only ones arguing for this. But then she'll also discuss which schools have cut, to our knowledge there are 18 now that have cut contracts with the F Corporation. And then RJ will follow with kind of a summary and argument.
Okay, if you don't mind, so that I can fully understand all this.
Yeah.
This is for me to learn a lot. I'm going to take notes. I'm going to ask you to slow down. Okay.
We were under the impression that we had an hour.
We got an hour, but still, I ask you to repeat something. It's make good notes on yourself.
Great.
Sounds great. Well, yeah, basically, we're here today, on the week after finals week, because all of us care about workers' rights. We believe, everyone in this room does. And we think that, cutting ties with the F Corporation for refusing to sign the Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh, following the Rana Plaza factory collapse of April 24th of 2013, we think cutting with BS for that reason is the right thing to do. And we see other colleges and universities making that decision and doing the right thing. And so Ashley's going to sort of start us off with talking about the Rana Plaza factory collapse and what that meant for the Accord and what that meant for workers' rights in Bangladesh.
So like Brock said, one of the contributing factors to our campaign has been the Rana Plaza factory collapse that occurred in Bangladesh on April 24th, 2013. And this was a significant event because it killed over 1,100 people and injured over 2,000 others and left over 800 children orphaned. And many of the people working in this factory were often underage and underpaid. And the problem with this factory was that the day before there were actually cracks seen in the building and the workers felt unsafe, but they were still told to go to work the next day and basically forced to work, even though they didn't feel safe. And so what happened was the next day this 8-story building collapsed and killed all of these people, and they weren't compensated for it. Until recently, the Children's Place gave over $2 million to these victims, but that still isn't really enough. And so this factory is affiliated with major brands such as Walmart and the Gap and the Children's Place. And even though it's
Wait
not,
a minute, excuse me. Walmart, The Gap, and who else?
children's place.
Okay, and you said it was affiliated with, what is it affiliated with?
They may close for those companies there.
They had product being manufactured.
Correct.
Yes, this, the Rana Plaza building has 5 factories that are making products for various different companies such as these on different floors. And even though VF Corporation wasn't directly affiliated with this factory, it's still, we're trying to show solidarity to all of the workers that are in Bangladesh because we do have other workers there that are making our products.
Is Walmart and The Gap and Children's Place still manufacturing things?
Yes.
So next, I'm, okay.
No, I hope I didn't interrupt you.
You're fine. So now I'm going to talk about our affiliation with the WRC, the Workers' Rights Consortium. We started this campaign in December of 2012, the campaign to affiliate with WRC, and you affiliated with WRC, to our knowledge, in March 2013, so about a month before Rana Plaza happened. And so we kind of brought some information on the WRC just to maybe refresh your memory. So the first piece of information that I find relevant would be the key principles outlined in the WRC's constitution. The first, there's 8, so I'm going to read them pretty quickly, so let me know if I go too fast.
This I think I can find a lot too.
Okay, I'll go through the highlights. Yeah.
Let me hear.
So the first is that it's the responsibility of the licensee to ensure workers are not exploited. So that would be, for example, like Jansport would be responsible for making sure that workers are not exploited. It's number 2 is that it's the university's role to define standards for treatment of workers and to hold the licensees accountable. The third key principle is that information is critical and that there should be an open dialogue between university and factories. 4 is that the enforcement should be based on citing companies for violations. 5 is that resources should be managed independently, e.g. WRC shouldn't be affiliating with the companies that they're monitoring, basically. The 6th key principle is that when abusive conditions are exposed, the licensee has an obligation to use their leverage to correct the conditions. So what that means basically is that they can't cut and run, so they can't pick up their product and move it to another factory because there was a fire or something like that. So they have an obligation to stay in that place and correct the condition instead of moving on to a different factory. 7 is that misreporting of locations and conditions by either the factory or the university is a serious offense that undermines the possibility of enforcement. Number 8 is that verification procedures must be continually reevaluated. So these key principles are important because we have already affiliated with the WRC, and so we have an obligation to live up to these key principles as a university. And so I imagine that maybe the athletic office, maybe the bookstore office has been keeping track of what factories we have been sourcing from, giving that information to the WRC. But what we want to make a point of this information is that in this, if we use this information, VF Corporation should be on our list of contracts to cut because they've already been cited by the WRC for having violations. And so what we're trying to prove or kind of elucidate is that what we've already done as a university makes it much more evident that we should be cutting this contract.
Excuse me, WRC is cited.
They've, on their website.
Jansport or Vanity Fair?
VF Corporation, yeah.
VF Corporation.
So they have made very clear that they think that their affiliates should cut this contract. And that information can be found on their website, which is workersrights.org.
So their affiliates should cut this contract.
Yes, they made that very clear on their website. They also have information about how they've done through the accord. There have been 1,106 factories evaluated, and 400 of them have had corrective action plans implemented.
Through the court, 1,100 inspected.
Yeah, and 400 have had corrective action plans.
How many have closed?
That I don't know, so.
We can get back to you on that information.
Right. So next we'll be hearing from Craig about the Alliance.
So, thanks again for meeting with us. I realize this is a lot of information to take in, and it's confusing. And in a lot of ways, it's confusing by design, because some companies have a vested interest in making it the kind of thing that people don't want to get involved in because it takes too much effort to learn about it. So we'll just trust them that they're going to do the right thing. So I want to take my section on the agenda to clarify a couple of points that are relevant to this, and there are two different approaches to ensuring workers' rights are protected in Bangladesh in the wake of the Rana Plaza disaster that Ashley told us about. One is called the Accord on Bangladeshi Building Safety, and Kieran's going to talk to us about that here in just a moment. But before we get into that, I want to talk about the Alliance for Bangladeshi Worker Safety, which sounds like the same thing. And again, it's confusing by design. But I want you to, in your mind, when we talk about the Alliance, I want you to write it in big red marker and draw a line to the Alliance. Yeah, this is the one that we don't want. And the reason that we don't want it is because there's no accountability built into the Alliance for Bangladeshi Worker Safety. The people the Alliance answers to are the people who are signatories on the Alliance, and that is exclusively the brand manufacturers themselves.
There's no accountability because of who organized it, who signed it, are the same people?
Correct, yeah. The Alliance it's been referred to as the people who sign onto it as a gentleman's agreement. And it's not legally enforceable. And there's a lot of, these are fairly lengthy documents, and there's a lot of reasons why it's not legally enforceable. But the Reader's Digest version, so I don't take up too much more of our time, is that the people who the Alliance signees are accountable to are themselves. They're the ones who choose the people who do the inspections for the factories.
Right.
They're the ones.
Wait.
Sure.
They choose, they don't have an independent.
Correct. There's not an
inspector. No independent inspector.
Right.
Okay.
If they come up with violations through their inspections, if we take them at their word and say, maybe the past couple decades of Bangladeshi manufacturing history and all of the thousands of deaths that happened at places, not just Rana Plaza, maybe those were a fluke, and maybe they really do want to improve this. If we take them at their word, when they find something wrong with the factory, there is no accountability with those inspection report that comes back to them. There's nothing in the Alliance that requires them to do anything. The workers...
Nothing requires them.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at both websites last night.
Yeah.
Okay. And I do so with an entirely open mind, trying to learn from you, trying to learn from them, and I'll try to learn more after this meeting. But, both of them list inspections, and they break them down into remediations, closures, and so believe me, I wouldn't be able to tell you that I did an extensive review, but I'll open some of those.
Cool.
And read them.
Well, I encourage you to go back.
And they are in spreadsheet form. There are lots of things.
Very confusing, yes.
In there. Well, both of them. I mean, if you walk into this, trying to find context and everything, and you're trying to understand, you're seeing reports of inspections, and in both, I would say granular level reports of violations.
Sure.
Specificity, just looking at them.
And
And only look at,
violations.
and I want to say, I only looked at, I looked at 2 or 3 just to get the nature of them. They get a long list you can look at.
Cool, yeah.
What we're trying to emphasize is that what he's talking about is the contract language of the Alliance. From our study of it, there is not a section of it that, like, for example, just to kind of offer something that Kieran will say later, the Accord has the ability, it has in its contract that the signatory can be sued in their home country if they violate the Accord, right? The same is not true of the Alliance. So that's when we say it's not legally enforceable, we mean that there is no repercussion for the Alliance members if they do not make these changes. So while they're in the spotlight, yes, they're making big changes. But when this is no longer an issue that people care about, are they still going to be legally able to find repercussion? And that's what we're worried about, is that as soon as this issue kind of fades, out of the limelight, are there still going to be legal binding agreements with these signatories? So Kieran is going to talk more about that in her section. Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to the Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh. The Accord is an independent, legally binding agreement between brands and trade unions, and its purpose is to enable a working environment in which no worker...
I'm going to give you time. Okay. And this is, you said, companies.
Yes.
And
Trade unions.
trade unions. Okay. And it is legally binding.
It's legally binding, yes.
And the workers' representatives are left out of the alliance. It's only the brands who have signed on to that. That's that crucial difference is workers don't have a voice at the table, and furthermore, universities don't have a voice at the table.
And in the Accord, universities are members?
Correct. The board of the Accord is made up of university representatives, workers' representatives,
I
and...
think you're confusing that with WRC. I'm not sure if that's true.
Well, WRC is on the board of the Accord, right?
Yeah, that's true. So,
I couldn't find, they got a list of companies, they don't have a list of universities.
Well, the universities are represented by the WRC,
which is a part of
the, exactly. So over 190 companies have signed on to the Accord, including 19 American companies, also 2 global trade unions, and 8 Bangladesh trade unions.
Okay. So this is the question I was going to ask earlier. I learned in trying to prepare for this that a disproportionate amount of product manufactured or sourced in Bangladesh seems to be headed to Europe.
smaller companies, yes, but the largest American company is Walmart, right? And they are sourcing from Bangladesh.
Okay.
So it's still a very good issue for America.
Right, and do you have, when you got, how many companies you have? You said 109.
190.
190 and 19 are U.S.
Yes.
And I don't know if they have any reason to, but would any of them, do any of them also sign up for the Alliance?
I don't believe there's any overlap. I think that it's usually one or the other.
And the alliance was created in response to the Accord by American corporations who didn't want to sign on to the Accord.
And the Accord was created as a response to Rana Plaza and the tragedy that occurred there. And to ensure that that kind of tragedy doesn't happen again, and that workers do have a voice and can say, like, hey, there's a crack in this wall. I don't think that this is a safe working condition, and they can refuse to work and not be penalized for it. That's written in the contract. That is in the Accord, which is not included in the Alliance.
The Alliance has no way for a worker to report an unsafe condition.
They have a toll-free number that they can call.
But the Accord is a much more extensive plan, including workers' voices. And they also give training to workers on fire safety measures.
Okay. I'm sorry, I've interrupted you several times, so you need to get back to your notes, please.
Okay. So transparency is a key element to the accord, and it required public disclosure of all factories, inspections, and corrective action plans. It legally binds signatory brands to ensure sufficient funds are available for remediation and to maintain sourcing relationships. So that goes back to what Autumn was saying earlier, how if they don't perform these remediaries in order to fix the problems that were found, they can be sued in their home country for this. The accord builds worker empowerment through an...
One other thing, not everything is a lawsuit. You said there are sufficient funds. It guarantees that sufficient funds, I assume, would be made available for remediation.
Correct.
Not every place is closed, not everybody files a lawsuit. There's this inspection. So how are those funds generated?
I believe so. When companies sign on to the accord, towards the end, it says that there is. Okay, so signatory companies in section 13 during remediation. Signatory companies shall require their supplier factories that are inspected under the program.
Hold on 1 second.
Okay. Okay, so shall require their supplier factories that are inspected under the program to maintain workers' employment relationship and regular income during any period that a factory or a portion of a factory is closed for renovations, to complete such corrective action plans for a period no longer than 6 months. Failure to do so may trigger notice, warning, and ultimately termination of the business relationship as described in paragraph 21.
So, and the next part is important. So they're going to, can't make a correction overnight. So
Correct.
then they say the next thing is should make reasonable effort. What is a reasonable effort to make to ensure that workers whose employment is terminated? Because that's horrible. We don't want that.
Right.
You know, I met with students on campus who I didn't know before from Nepal, given the natural disaster there. And when they tell me what a contribution can mean, you know, $100 can feed a lot of people in Nepal. It's a different economy. So this is huge to me. They ensure and they want reasonable effort. Not a lot of teeth in that.
I think it's pretty standard for a legal contract.
Correct.
Reasonable has like a legal definition. So they're using kind of contract legalese, you know, in order to kind of make this fair for everyone involved. So I think that, I mean, the corrective action plans that you mentioned would outline what reasonable would mean for each individual situation.
And the corrective action plans are created by the steering committees and the advisory boards, which are created under the accord, and the steering committee is equal representation of trade union signatories and company signatories, and also a representative chosen from the International Labor Organization as a neutral chair.
Okay, so we're getting about to 10:30, so we should probably move to Brock's talk about the VF Corporation. So maybe we could ask some questions about the accord at the end.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight VF Corporation's track record. So as Ashley stated, VF isn't affiliated with the Rana Plaza factory, which sort of the collapse of which galvanized 190 companies to sign on to the accord. And also, as we all know, we contract with VF Corporations, which is a parent brand company that has subsidiaries or child companies like JanSport, Imagewear, Majestic, and a lot of brands that we don't have, like Wrangler, Vans, and others. And so here's sort of like 9 incidents in which factory fires occurred or workers were beaten for.
Because I know you're worried about time. I'm not going to interrupt you. I'm going to hear all 9, but I may ask you to send those to me.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. I can definitely send this to you. Yeah, we meant to have, we had printer malfunctions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so in December 2010, That's It Sportswear is the name of the factory. I'm going to say the time, the factory, and what happened for each of these. December 2010, That's It Sportswear factory in Bangladesh burns, and 29 were dead and 100 were wounded, and that's a factory. All these are factories that VF Corporation contracted with and sourced apparel from. December 2010, a Young One Group factory in Bangladesh. Workers were protesting the minimum wage, and 4 were killed and 100 were wounded by the police who were called out on them protesting. February 2012, Hawkins Apparel Factory in Honduras closes, and VF Corporation refuses to pay legally owed severance, which still has not been paid. Severance, do you know what severance is? Yeah.
Severance if you can.
Yeah, and so they refused to pay that. October 2012, Eurotex factory in Dhaka, Bangladesh caught fire on a holiday, and so thankfully nobody was working and nobody died from that incident. February 2013, E-Garment Factory in Cambodia, peaceful union leaders were violently attacked by the news hit says thugs that were in collusion with the factory owners in that case, who called out people to come beat them up, which happens, all too often in the case of a lot of worker organizing and oftentimes environmental organizing abroad. April 2013, there's a report in which all factories in Haiti, all garment factories in Haiti are undercutting workers and doing wage theft by not paying them the full minimum wage. And so VF Corporation has chosen to contract with those factories that don't pay Haitian workers the minimum wage. August 2013, Optimum Fashion, a factory in Bangladesh, safety violations were uncovered by the Workers' Rights Consortium, who sent representatives to inspect the factory, to which factory workers, or factory owners, blocked the doorway and, wanted to refuse to let them enter, even though that they were allowed to enter because they were affiliated with, colleges and universities that contracted from there, as through other brands. April 2014, Yuyan factory in China, 48,000 workers walk off the job because they wanted social insurance payments that was legally owed to them, and they weren't getting those, and so several were beaten and kidnapped. June 2014, one of the more recent ones, Medlar Apparel's factory in Bangladesh burns and several were injured. And I'm also going to send you one that I didn't write down here. It was even more recent than June 2014, in which a factory there was sort of like a chemical issue nearby at a factory that the VF Corporation contracted with, and some workers fell sick. And so VF Corporation has chosen to contract with the very factories that jeopardize workers' lives all around the world. And, in the case of, undercutting and severance, they cut and run when workers ask for, their social insurance payments or a better minimum wage to support themselves and their family. And, VF has made that choice that they want to exploit workers to turn a profit for themselves. And in the way that VF has that choice, the University of Kentucky, like 18 other colleges and universities that Amelia's going to talk about, has the choice to do the right thing and contract with apparel brands that respect their workers. And when apparel brands do especially horrid things like refusing to accept legal accountability for the safety of their workers and the safety of the buildings they work in, we can choose to tell that company that we're not going to do business with them until they agree to accept legal accountability, like 18 other colleges and universities have done. So, it's up to colleges and universities in the U.S. to, trust the students who are asking and demanding that they cut ties with VF, trust them along with provided backup information and research, or to trust the brands that carry our college logos.
Okay, so like what Brock said, our national campaign, this is a huge deal. Like, this is solidarity for these workers. And for the Rana Plaza collapse, obviously that gained global attention because over 1,000 workers were killed. And like Brock said, there are several accounts of workers who've been killed under VF's occupation. And saying like maybe 1,000 workers weren't killed in one incident, but there have been several accounts of 20 workers killed, 10, and maybe this hasn't been making global news, but that's why our national campaign, we're trying to bring this up to the front, that yes, maybe people aren't very aware of what VF is doing because there are several incidents that might not be big enough to make national news or global news, but that's why we're trying to bring this up. And there are now 19 universities cut, and U of L actually just cut theirs, and they've been...
It's weird to shoot for little boys.
I know, exactly, but solidarity with them, because they've actually helped us and we've helped them as well, but they've been working on this for a year. Like they did a sit-in for a whole week and finally they got it cut. So this summer they are not going to renew their contract with JanSport. And they're aware, U of L is aware that their clothes are not sourced from Bangladesh, but they stated despite that, they're saying that these conditions aren't right. And like the other 18 universities that cut, we are doing so to make VF sign on to the accord, because despite our companies or our factories that are making our clothes are not in Bangladesh, there are companies and corporations that they're through VF that are in Bangladesh. So it is the fact that we are trying to improve these working conditions and make sure they don't at least happen in Bangladesh, and hopefully later on we can have another accord that's going to places like Haiti and other countries that are facing conditions like this.
So I did read something about you. So they had an RFP and they chose other company to work with them. Is it that that company that's selected doesn't work via? Is that how it works? I mean, who they work with?
JanSport is a subsidiary company.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just trying to understand Louisville, because JanSport, they're not going to do JanSport. The JanSport wasn't in Bangladesh anyway.
Right.
Right. Okay, Vanity Fair was. The new companies that they are associated with, are they manufacturing in Bangladesh at all?
If they are manufacturing in Bangladesh, under this new agreement, is that any contracts that they do hold with any factories, they have to sign on to the accord. So if they are in Bangladesh, they will be on to the accord.
So the 18 U.S. companies that have now signed the accord.
18 colleges and universities.
It's 19.
Oh, 19.
No.
They're
19
competitors. Very easy.
Right, but earlier you said there are 190 companies, 19 have signed. So it has to be that one of those 19 companies is their manufacturer. I mean, because it really gets down to the company signing the accord, what you said earlier.
Correct. And it's my understanding that a lot of universities have approached this in their letter to VF Corporation to say, you have until our contract has expired to sign on to the accord, or we will find somebody else. So a lot of it is couched in future tense. And so it's not like an immediate, this contract's gone today. And we have copies of the letters from those other universities we can provide you too.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I think we provided them in our race to cut VF action. I believe we provided them for y'all in the office, but we can send those to y'all again if that would be helpful.
Electronic.
Would you like us to send it again? Okay, great.
Yes.
And go ahead.
So going on with that, so there's now 18 universities that cut, and they include like Cornell, Michigan University, Syracuse University, University of Florida, Emerson, Rutgers. It continues. Like there's many schools that have done so, and actually a majority of these universities, their apparel isn't sourced. If they have a contract with JanSport is not actually working in Bangladesh. So some of these schools, they have cut their contracts, and that is the case. So it is not always the case, we see that our workers that are making our clothes specifically are being mistreated. It's the fact that we are associated with a corporation that has allowed these violations to occur. And it's more than just what is going on and how we're connected to it. You could see in like a newspaper article saying UK works with a company that has this many workers harmed, but it's the fact that we are associated on a grander scale with this corporation and their companies. And many universities noticed that, and even Rutgers president even said it's simply the right thing to do. And they're not even associated with English, or Jansport isn't. And also with American University in McAllister.
So it is the right thing to do. We all want to do the right thing. But if they're doing the right thing, it has no consequence for what they're doing, except symbolically.
It's more than a symbolic.
But what I want to know is what they have signed the accord that says any apparel manufactured that has their logo, or they've licensed to, it's got to be one of these 19 companies that has signed the accord.
Or they just don't make apparel in Bangladesh, if that makes sense. So it can be, because Bangladesh has one of the weakest labor laws systems in Southeast Asia. And Southeast Asia, as you probably know, is one of the major hubs of the garment industry. And so a lot of companies will flock there because they have the weakest labor system. That has to do with political problems with the way that their political system works. But what we're trying to highlight is that there's still 190,000 workers that work under the corporation in Bangladesh. So it's not an insignificant, and it's not symbolic. It really will affect 190,000 people.
And
so,
every life matters, and that's
right.
what's kind of hard since we're in a globalized world. Like, we do not understand who's making our clothes, what their life is like, and we might think that's the way of the world. There's some people who are going to have to work under these conditions while we buy them for cheap. But this doesn't have to be, and that's what what we need to accept, especially as a university and a great institution. We have such an obligation to make sure this doesn't happen, not just on our campus, but even in our mission statement. We support the rights of everyone, and just following on and accurately displaying our values. And also, it's not just symbolically by cutting, it's actually a financial penalty basically to these corporations and companies. It's saying that you are not acting responsibly and you're not taking liability for the workers and for the future possibility that these workers may be harmed. And for that reason, we are not going to be associated with you, and you're not going to have our contract of millions of dollars. And with every university that cuts, that is millions of dollars taken away from their profit. And it is affecting them. This happened with, a company actually that we try to get on campus, Altagracia, that they pay their workers a living wage. They're the first company to do so that supplies collegiate apparel. And at first, Night Apparel that Altagracia is from, they treated their workers horribly, and they weren't paid, anything that someone can live off of. But because the workers were pushing, and so were the consumers and schools were, they changed their whole system, and now it's one of the best companies that we can source from for our university. So saying that this could happen to other universities, and we're giving them the chance to do so. By harming them financially, they're going to realize they have no choice but to sign the accord and be more responsible and follow maybe more of the Altagracia system. And that's why we're doing this. There's 18 schools, if you can even calculate how much money they're losing. In UK, having a large contract with Jansport, this is going to be a huge hit. And it's not that this is a permanent cut. Everyone is doing this until they sign on to the accord, until this makes a big enough difference. And until what they do is right, we can be associated with them again. So if they realize this is not going to be long-term unless they work with us. So it's definitely financial as well, because we can't just rely on individual consumers as much as we like to believe. If we made a responsible purchase, that'll make a difference. It's institutions like big universities that have a big impact to do so. And that's why we are trying to do this with the University of Kentucky. And it's also about legacy, what do we want to leave behind at UK? And if we don't do this now, eventually it will happen, because there's 18 schools, and some of them, it's probably hard to imagine that they cut, thinking that they're big, sports schools like Chicago, or University of Illinois. They're not a sports school, but
University of Michigan.
Yeah, University of Michigan, University of Florida. These are big schools that have a lot of apparel for their sports, and they've done so. So it's not that it's impossible, and that there's not a way that we can get around this and find other companies to be affiliated with for now.
I'm just curious, historically, did the University of Florida, I guess they have their agreement, just like the University of Louisville just did their RFP. But the University of Florida, when they signed on to their core, required their suppliers. Were their suppliers in Bangladesh in the first place, or did they happen to be one of those 18 companies that had signed the core?
Right. So I was actually looking at all their letters, and I don't remember exactly. We will send you the letters because it'll state in most of the letters, some of them are very simple and to the point and don't give much of a reason why, but there are universities that many, like Cornell and Emerson and Rutgers, that mention that they are not associated with Bangladesh through JanSport, but they're still cutting. So there are universities that are still doing so, and University of Michigan and Florida, we can look into that.
I have the letter right here, and it reads that it tells them we have workers' code of conduct. We're a WRC affiliate, which obligates us to cut our contract with you. If you want to work with us further, and this is a direct quote, if you are unprepared or unwilling to reach for this level of commitment, that is the level of commitment in the Bangladeshi Building and Safety Fire Accord, we are prepared to terminate our license and agreement with VF Corporation and JanSport. So JanSport was the brand that made their apparel.
Yes.
So now RG is going to talk about what our demand is for this meeting and what we're kind of wrap up everything.
So we're certainly grateful that you all took the time to meet with us. We appreciate that. We came here hoping to speak for not just ourselves, but those of us who, are at work and couldn't make this time, or went home for the summer, or those of us who are the people who are in our different student and community group partners in this campaign against VF. And so we came here and we wanted to ask directly, would you commit to ending ties with the VF Corporation unless or until they sign on to the Accord? Or would UK commit to ending ties with VF Corporation until or unless they sign on to the Accord?
That is you said it's a request.
That was our question, and we wanted to have it to deliver an answer for our partners.
I would say that this has been enlightening to me this morning. I came here to learn. There is more I need to learn. Okay? And I'm committed to doing so before I answer that question, but I will answer that question.
What are your action steps? Like, what steps are you planning on taking after this meeting to inform yourself and then report back to us?
I will use a variety of means to find additional facts, and there's some that you're going to provide me, some you've already provided me that I'll look more carefully at again. That's what I'm going to do.
What questions or concerns do you have over the information that we've provided you?
There may be other questions I pose to you.
And how do you
give me that opportunity?
How do you plan to communicate with us?
Who would you like me to communicate to?
Does anyone feel particularly inclined? Does anyone have work obligations that would make them unavailable during business hours? You want somebody who could be contacted during business hours, correct?
If you could email our Student for Trade Justice email account that we've been communicating with Dr. Smith before, we all have access to that and can respond rapidly. I just also want to say that this is a very time-sensitive issue. People's lives are on the line every minute that VF does not sign on to the Accord. So please, inform yourself with haste, or not with haste, but quickly and thoroughly, because this is something that needs to happen as soon as possible.
Yeah, and as we said, we've been trying to orchestrate this meeting since September, so we would appreciate the time, just because we've been waiting for a pretty long time.
9 months.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.